Are we ready to start again?
I'll do what I did.
Thank you. We have a panel discussion now, and this will be our last event. This will go until about 12:30. And each of the panelists will speak for 5 or 10 minutes about their perspective and their community's perspective on white Christian nationalism, particularly in Oklahoma today, how they see it affecting their community and what they're concerned about. And then we'll have a discussion between the panelists, and then at the end we'll open it up for Q&A. Our panel is Veronica Laizure, who's the Deputy Director at the Council of America Islamic Relations, Oklahoma. Sheri Dickerson, who's the founder and executive director of Black Lives Matter, Oklahoma City, among many, many other things. She's also an ordained minister of, I can't remember the names of she's an ordained minister. And Adam Brooks, who is the president of the Jewish Federation of Oklahoma City, and he attends Temple B'nai Israel, where our good friend Baird Harris is the rabbi. Sheri, why don't you start? And if you can just come up and tell us how the world looks to you.
Okay. Are we using it? Is this on? Can you hear me? Good morning. How the world looks to me. Well, it is a Saturday and it is 2 days after the state-sanctioned murder of Jermaine Cannon, and 1 day after another brother that was also a victim of state-sanctioned murder in Alabama. And I attended the incident, the homicide, on Thursday. And so the world still looks very bleak and glib. Not that it doesn't on many days when you're in Black and brown skin. And so I will not apologize, but I will advise that in moments like this, even when we are assembling in community, those that deal with the burden of existence within varied marginalized communities, we may not and should not be expected to have the vigor or the energy, nor do we want to carry the space of camaraderie. So the world looks different on every day, and within the systems of white Christian nationalism, which is amplification of white supremacy, which is the foundation for Christianity as a whole. And I know some of y'all may be shocked by that, but the Bible itself was literally interpreted, and the most known version that is used was written by white men, and it has continued to be reverberated, reiterated from that same voice with the same ideology. And even the Bible itself was utilized, and it was broken down into factions to where they had a Bible especially made for enslaved Blacks that taught them how to be better enslaved people, how to be compliant, and it taught them about the dehumanization of entire communities and people. It was godly, that it was ordained by the God, and that this is what Jesus wanted, and that their lives did not matter, and that they were cattle and chattel. And so in the lens for today, I don't have a lot of energy. I have a lot of respect for the presentations that have been given. With Lisa, I oscillated back and forth as to, yes, I wanted to be here in support. I have so much respect for the work, the entire body of work that she does, but I didn't feel like seeing the pictures that we're deeming history, but they're still lynching Black people all across this country. And 2 days ago, a lynching occurred at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary. And so I can't tell you exactly how I feel, because in some moments I am feeling extreme rage. And I try to balance that out with my pastoral and clerical call into serving and loving people in a Christ-like fashion. And I'm often surprised when they talk about being Christ-like, and they don't seem to remember that Christ himself was a dark-skinned man who was executed, murdered, and slandered by the state, the powers that be. And so history is repeating itself. And we're still having to have conversations. And a lot of my non-melanated friends who identify as progressive or liberal or Christians have somewhat, I think, of a jaded perspective about what's actually happening, because they talk about, well, when are we going to do another protest and when are we going to speak out? Well, every morning when I wake up and I walk out of my door in Black skin, in Indigenous skin, in queer skin, as a person who is fat, who is non-binary, my whole day is a protest. And we decide how successful we are by how many of us get to actually make it home alive. And that is what we talk to our children and our children's children and our friends and our family, and even our allies. And I'm not looking for allies. I'm looking for accomplices, because accomplices get into the trenches. My accomplices, and some of them are non-melanated. They hold the front line. They have stood in front of me. They have actually taken literal bullets when they were being strewn in antics to literally disparage movement work. And so that's what we need. The conversations, we should be turning them to not only asking what is actionable, but making the decision to be very intentional and deliberate in the actions that you are taking. And no longer expecting our words to be palatable. We're not here to make you comfortable. We're not here to educate you on what it is to exist as a marginalized person. We now are standing here saying, our house is still on fire. Our lives are still in imminent danger every day. And we are asking those with conscience, those who love whatever God it is that you serve, with whatever faith system that you embody, that you decide to be a person who stands on the right side of simple humanity and make sure that people like myself and the other persons of colors in this room don't have the heavy burden every day, every moment, trying to decide whether or not we make it home alive. So I don't know if that answers how I'm feeling, but that's all of this is done under the gaze of white Christian nationalism. But I'm also not interested in redefining white supremacy, racism, and someone asked about the definition of woke. Woke is what most Black people hope to be, because it means that we woke up that morning, and we want to awake the next morning. I don't know how that has been vilified, but the white Christian nationalists, they do a very good job of really casting the scales over the eyes, and just conflating simple truths. Ashe.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here. Thank you for the panelists, Don. Thank you for inviting me. My name's Adam Brooks. My pronouns are he, him. And one thing I'm really aware of as I stand here is that while I am Jewish, I am a cis white male in Oklahoma, and that provides a lot of privilege. And one of the things I heard several years ago that I always think about is this idea that when all you've known is privilege, equality feels like oppression. And I think this is kind of one of the themes I'm hearing this morning is this idea of why. Why are people falling for white nationalism? Why is it appealing to people? Is it hate? Is it rage? I think in part it is that people feel the world changing and they know that things are arcing away from them being privileged, and that is scary. So that puts them in a space where these ideas that, oh, we're just talking about liberty and we're just talking about freedom and we're just talking about patriotism are very appealing. If I'm going to try to keep it short, because I think if I go too far, there's just many thoughts on all these topics, and I'm sure we'll address them. But I do want to say, I represent myself. I am a Jewish person that informs where I come from. I wouldn't say that I represent all Jews, even in the Oklahoma City community. We have a wide variety of opinions. There's an old saying, 2 Jews, 3 opinions. That is definitely true. I am not a historian, but I am interested in history and I read carefully. I'm a professional communicator, and that really does inform how I see a lot of these things. Again, this idea of what is woke, it is intentional that Ron DeSantis and others use it to mean anything I don't like. That is like, it is not that they don't know. It's not that they haven't thought of it. It's not that they're not smart. They understand that if you just give a vague term, that is real easy for people to fight against. And so that brings them to them because they're scared of things, because the world is changing. The idea of religion and government, and this really does come from my Jewish background. I believe that pluralism is one of the great strengths of the United States. I still do believe in our ideals. We've never achieved them. We have much work to do. We have to hold these 2 ideas in mind, that we have many problems related to race and religion and these things in the country. But we are also one of the most progressive places in the world, even compared to some of these nations that look really great from the outside and are, say, Northern Europe. We've talked about these issues. We've fought about these issues. We've wrestled with them. We are not 2 solutions, but we have made so much progress. And I try to keep that in mind sometimes, even on these really painful days and when really horrible things happen. The question earlier was, how do we feel kind of as we're losing these things? There are so many people who are fighting on what we all, I think, consider the good side, that we agree with, that are fighting for progressive values, that are fighting for equality. Even in Oklahoma, where someone like Ryan Walters was, Ryan Walters is not a surprise, right? He is doing exactly what he promised he would do, and he was elected by 57% of the voters in Oklahoma. That is a problem. But that means 43% of the people are out there on the other side. There are days we lose. There are many days we lose, but there are also days we win, and we know that we have allies. And that's why it's important to come together and talk about these things. Just a final thought that keeps occurring to me today. At Temple B'nai Israel, I don't believe we have a flag on the bema. I would have to check, a U.S. flag. But we do, toward the end of our Friday night ceremonies, have a prayer for our nation. And one of the lines is that we pray that we merit God's protection because we're doing the right things. And that, I think, is one of the ideals that really appeals to me in Judaism, is that we are not just saved, and whatever people believe in here, that's fine. But the idea is that we have to work to repair the world. And this does get into theology. There's a lot of questions about, oh, what's heaven like in Judaism? Well, we don't really have that much of a conception of it. And for me, we don't know, and we can't know what comes next, if anything. We do know what things are like in this world. We do know the work that we can do and the changes that we can make to improve things for ourselves, for our brothers, for our sisters, for everybody in our community. And that's the work that we're called to do. So I look forward to the discussion.
Good morning. My name is Veronica. I use she, her pronouns, and I have the honor of serving as the Deputy Director for CAIR Oklahoma, as Don shared with you. So today you are here to talk about white nationalism. The fact that I can say we're here to talk about white nationalism and nobody gets up and leaves is huge progress. That's some strides that we've made in just the past few years, right? And you invited me here today, a Korean American atheist who works for a Muslim civil rights organization in the capacity of a constitutional lawyer, to talk to you today. So you can put right out of your head any notion that I'm going to make you feel comfortable or that I'm going to lie to you or that I'm going to tell you anything other than the truth as I see and understand it, based on my experiences as a person, my experiences in the community that I work in, and the experiences that we've had as leaders in the social justice world in Oklahoma over the past years of our organization. So I just want to kind of give that primer to you because I know you've been having a lot of tough conversations. It is really hard to look within a community, within your own community, and say, I understand that these people who are doing these hurtful things, are these harmful things, who are causing so much pain to others, they call themselves like me. They look like me. They claim to hold the same values that I hold. I see myself reflected in them, and that is uncomfortable, right? That is a painful, difficult, uncomfortable thing to confront. But by doing that confrontation, it would be so easy to just say, oh, those people aren't really Christians. They're not like me. It would be so easy to set aside that association and just say, oh, I don't have to think about that because they're not really Christian. They're not really from my community. But we know here in Oklahoma, based on our history as a community, our history as a state, even our history as a city, we know that we don't get to do that, right? We have to confront the fact that these things, these people, these ideas, this pain and this harm, this grew here, right? Ryan Walters is the product of Oklahoma. And I know that we don't want to confront that, but we have to. Because only by recognizing these things that make us angry do we move forward into the future. And I've been really fortunate to borrow ideas from religious traditions to which I don't belong myself. And I find so much courage and so much inspiration from that. And I'm reminded constantly of a line from St. Augustine, which is that hope has two beautiful daughters. The first is anger at the way that things are. And we have much to be angry about, my friends. And if you do not see that, if you are not angry, then you are not paying attention. But the second is courage. It's the courage to see that things do not remain as they are. And you've displayed that courage by coming here, by remaining here in your discomfort, and by committing yourselves to moving forward with the lessons that you have learned over this weekend and today. So thank you for being here. Thank you for listening with open ears and open hearts. Please ask us all of the questions that I know are burning in your minds. I commit to being honest with you if you will also commit to being honest with me and with my fellow panelists. So I look forward to this discussion. Thank you.
we'll just pass this mic back and forth when you guys want to talk. Do you guys have any questions for each other?
We'll just see what comes.
Okay. Okay. Well, I have one. I have one for you. So I'm a progressive Christian. We have the Sermon on the Mount on the wall back here. I believe David Galston, with the executive director of the West Star Institute, which is successor to the Jesus Seminar, says that love your enemies means you don't have enemies. It's impossible to love somebody that's an enemy. And my question is, how can we relate to someone whose views are so offensive to us?
I have the mic, so I'll start. It is really about believing in the goodness of people. And there's something a boss of mine used to say, that there's a fallacy that we all tend to believe, that if everybody knew what I knew, they'd feel what I feel. And that's not always true. But I do believe that generally people are good. And they want to do the right thing, but we get people who divide us for their own power, for their own beliefs, sometimes sincere beliefs. And we do have to actively fight against that. We have to think about uncomfortable things and face them and say, why do I believe this? Where does this come from? But I don't believe ultimately that there can be change if we say someone is an enemy, I don't love them. That leads to writing people off. And I believe that ultimately what we're trying to do is bring people together. It's not easy, it's not fast, but if you have faith overall in humanity, when they see good, they'll come to you. And we see examples of this, right? It's slow progress, but we see, I'm thinking of the example of, and it's a bit of a stereotype, the old white male Republican who hates gay people, until his son or his nephew or his niece comes out and realizes, oh, wait, maybe this isn't that bad. Or what we've really seen societally, 15 years ago, maybe even 20 years ago, people were very worried, sincerely worried about what same-sex marriage would do to society, how it would destroy everything. And then it passed, it became more common. And I wouldn't say it's not an issue now, but it's much less of an issue now. More people fewer people are worked up about it now, because they've seen, oh, these are just people like me who want to make a commitment to somebody for a lifetime and see how it goes. That is progress that we've made as a society, because we allowed people to see what things are really like. They met people they knew, it came to their families. So I don't want to write people off, because I believe that they can come to better places.
Well, love thy enemy. That is something that I have been taught. I am a third generation PK, which means I am the daughter and the granddaughter and the niece and the great granddaughter of pastors or ministers. And they always said that the people who are the most broken are the ones that need to be loved on the most. And I remember being young saying, but how do you learn to embrace those that are causing me what they deemed acceptable harm? And what do I mean by that? They taught me that I had bodily autonomy, and that no one had the right to violate my physical being. They taught me that there were words that were inappropriate, that were created to dehumanize and to cause disrespect. And I wondered in my youth how we were supposed to decipher what is the acceptable harm, what is acceptable hate, and how do I decide who I'm really supposed to love on, and who is the most broken. And how do I do that when people are intentionally trying to break my spirit, when they continually break my heart, and I watch them break apart the nucleus of my community. And here in my 50s, I'm still grappling with what does the expectation of love look like when it is my enemy. I have and love and appreciate and respect non-melanated people in my life. Some of them are here. They gave me encouraging words. They said, be tenacious, be ferocious. Don't be afraid to tell the truth. And some of them have said things or done things, and then they've come up and apologized and said, that was a bonehead move. I realized in my whiteness, in my privilege, in my ignorance, that I caused harm. And so people that love us, people that genuinely care, people that are wanting to make a difference, they sometimes are the most broken. And so one of my sorors, she said to me about 25 years ago, she said, you do know that you get to choose who you allow to use you. And when you're in your 20s, it doesn't mean the same thing. I didn't quite get it. But around 47, so only several years ago, it hit me that, oh, I get to choose who I allow to use me, because we all use one another for different situations, circumstances, understanding, even in relationship. And that's not a negative, but I get to choose. And that means I also have a very small modicum of control over harm. I do not choose to stay in community with those who I know, and those who relish in the fact that they are my enemy. But I am equally as concerned of the unknown enemy and the enemy of the, and I hope you all don't feel like this is a slur, I don't mean it that way, but we have the faux-aggressives, and we have a breed of snowaggressive who decides that within their privilege, what they're doing is acceptable and they should get kudos because they are simply being a sensible, logical, good-mannered human. And when did we start giving awards for simply being a good person? Many of us, if they did, would deserve them. And then many of us would probably deserve to be defrocked of that award on many a days when we weren't feeling like it. So loving your enemy sometimes means that we have to love on ourselves most, so that we can work on our broken spaces. And then we're able to be better in community and humanity as a whole.
So if the question is, how do I love my enemy, right? I think it requires somewhat of a redefinition of love. You can love people that you don't particularly like. And also, loving people does not mean agreeing with everything that they do or say. Loving does not mean allowing someone's behavior to go unchecked. I don't know if any of you in here have or have raised kids, or dogs, or have lived with partners. But loving someone does not mean letting them do whatever they want with no consequences. So loving someone who holds beliefs that are antithetical to my values or to my ethics does not mean letting their behavior go without some check. I'm sure many of you in this room are familiar with the sensation of sitting around a dinner table when a relative says something real stupid and you don't know what to do about it, right? You cannot believe that your beloved Uncle Bob has just said what he just said. What do I do about this? And I'm sure that it's kept you up at night. How can I love someone who is my family, who has said this very harmful thing, was acted in this harmful way, who has voted for, supported leaders who are actively causing harm to myself and my community? And I think the answer is that you can love them on a personal level without loving their behavior and its consequences on a systemic level. You can love Uncle Bob for all of the great memories that you and Uncle Bob shared and still say, hey, we don't talk about people like that here. I came here to have dinner. I didn't come to talk about that. If that's what you'd like to talk about, you're going to have to find someone else and somewhere else to do that, because I'm not going to do it with you, right? I love you. I will see you when you're ready to talk about other things and when you're ready to have dinner. But if you're not ready to do that, I'm just going to go. Just peace out. That is love. Loving someone means wanting them to be their best. And Uncle Bob saying racist things at the dinner table, you know he's capable of better than that. And so I think this redefinition, right, of love and relationships really helps to form actions rather than letting you stew in how you feel conflicted emotionally, right? Your actions can reflect that you, one, see your dinner table as a place of love and community and not conflict. That two, your actions show that Uncle Bob can be better, can do better, and that's what you want for Uncle Bob. And three, that the other people in the room should not be subjected to this. And that if they do want to have that conversation, they can do so without your presence in their lives. So I think the constant sort of mental conflict of how do I love someone who's so antithetical to me? You can, but that doesn't mean you have to support them or platform them or let them say horrible things about your family and your community and your friends around your dinner table.
I'd like to follow up on a point Sheri made about what I'll call lukewarm allies. Martin Luther King wrote his letter to a Birmingham jail to lukewarm allies, the ministers in Birmingham who called themselves allies but wanted to go slow. So I would just like to ask each of you to talk about lukewarm allies of your community. Adam, specifically, I'd like you to address Christian Zionists. I visited Israel-Palestine 3 years ago with the seminary, and I was at the Temple Wall. And I turned around behind me and look, and there's this giant complex that's founded by Christian Zionists with the Israeli flags flying. How do you understand and try to relate to Christian Zionists?
So there's a lot there. And I do want to say one thing that I think gets lost a lot of times, especially in certain factions of American politics, is that while Jews generally support the idea of Israel very strongly and think it's important, that does not necessarily mean supporting current government or particular policies. These are all very complicated things. It is not black and white. Many people in the Jewish community have a lot of concerns about current policies. So let's say that for starters. Yeah, there are a lot of folks who say that they are allies and they love the Jewish people and they love Israel. And it is related to this end time stuff about needing certain things to happen in Jerusalem so that Jesus can come back. We find that very hard. We don't find that, I think, generally to be actual support of Jewish people or Judaism. We find that to be, this kind of goes to an idea that Sheri made, that sometimes people say they're an ally, but what they're really doing is promoting themselves and their own ideas and making themselves feel good. And so I think that's what happens is they say, oh, we obviously want to love Israel. That means we love Jews, even though we all want them to convert and go be with Jesus in the rapture. I'm not saying that represents everybody in this room or in Christianity, but there are people who believe that. So yeah, I think we are really uncomfortable with those folks because it doesn't feel like actual support. It feels like wanting to convert us. When I was in college, I wrote some columns because the Southern Baptist Convention sort of, I think they used the word target in one of their platform pieces, that they thought Jews were ripe for conversion. Well, they see that as love. Some people see that as, oh, well, we're trying to get them to a better place so that they can be saved, which I believe in many cases is sincere, but also is a form of erasure. So yeah, I think at the bottom, personally, I am, and I think many Jewish people are uncomfortable with the idea that some people say, we love the Jews, we can't wait to convert them. Those seem to be ideas that are in conflict.
Okay.
I don't know if anybody.
Yes, sure. Go give it to Sheri. You started touching on it. Just expand.
Lukewarm allies. Well, they are not small in number. I believe that many of them do not realize that that is the community or the faction that they are participating in. And when you ask someone who is lukewarm or tepid, or point out something, they are usually the ones that take the most offense. And they immediately begin to refute. And the refuting, even if you're giving them facts and showing evidence and proof, or as young people say, receipts of that shows how their actions would be defined as lukewarm allyship, it usually turns to rebuke of you or the movement or the work. And then they'll say, well, look, I'm trying and you should give me credit for trying. And I just need a little bit more time because I'm working at it. And, I should. And I was like, well, we've only had a little bit over 400 years for you to get comfortable in being uncomfortable in learning not how to be God forgive me and Don too, since this is your house, and not being a racist jackass. And so I don't have time. I don't have any more time. I don't want to afford you time, and I don't want to waste time while people are trying to decide how vigorous, how committed, how serious, and or how sincere they are in wanting to work against anti-Blackness, against Islamophobia, against homophobia and transphobia. And if you get more outraged when it is a person, when something happens to a person who is non-melanated, than you do when the same actions have continued to happen to those in Black and brown skin, you might be lukewarm. And you might be cold in spaces that you don't even realize, and you are allowing yourself and you are making the choice to stay in that faction. So there are even a few scriptures that talk about if something is lukewarm, spitting it out. So don't be surprised when those of us who acknowledge and decide not to deal with your lukewarmness, we spit you out.
I'm going to start by talking about what I do when confronted with the lukewarm ally, which is I try to give, in the work that I do, I try to give everyone at every level of activism something that they feel activated to do. right? I try to make sure that everybody can participate at some level, wherever they are kind of in their comfort, right? I fully recognize that the streets are not for everybody, right? Not everybody can do that for many, many reasons. And that is okay. But if you cannot support the folks who are out, if you can't be on the streets, you can support the folks who are out in the streets. You can donate to make sure they are hydrated, that they are fed, that they are safe, that they have anchors if something should happen to them, right? If you're not able to do that kind of contribution, you can share accurate information. Even just sharing something on social media that says, you might have heard this. Did you know this is actually what's happening? This is actually correct. You can call out bad behavior in online spaces, not because you're going to change the mind of a troll or a hater, but because you can set the expectation that this is how we interact with each other, even online, right? And if you feel super uncomfortable with that, just being able to sit and read or listen to something that makes you uncomfortable, that is activism. And so even folks who feel uncomfortable taking strong steps in support of justice, there is still some way for you to be involved. I do ask when I start folks off with this sort of baseline level of let's just learn together, I ask, do you feel like you can escalate that to action, right? That's what I try to do in my work, is to give everyone an entrance into doing the right thing wherever they are, meeting them where they are. How I feel about it might be completely different, right? I'm with you, Sheri. We're tired. We don't have time to explain things that you can Google. And I don't have, we don't have the energy to hold every single individual's hand on every single step of the road to justice. That's not a reasonable thing to ask of us. And it's not kind to ask that of us, to expect that of us, to say, well, I am standing right here and I'm not taking another step unless you're holding my hand. We're grownups, like we grown, we can do this. But from the perspective of someone who tries to be a leader, I make sure that there is something, some way that every single person can take a step, even if it's just, I'm going to read a book, I'm going to listen to a podcast, or watch a YouTube video. Be careful about the YouTube videos, though. They're not all good. But read something, listen to someone else that you don't know about. Do something that makes you uncomfortable, and that is activism. The goal is, the hope is that you will be led to take those further steps, not because of what any of us are saying to you. We're not dragging you along, that you will feel empowered to take those steps on your own, with your own community, within your own circles. So I guess I just don't worry so much about it, because we're too tired. We're to focus on the work. And people will either come with us or they won't.
This is a little bit of an aside, but it's coming from a lot of the things that have been said, is this idea of allyship, but also we sometimes hear this term virtue signaling as this negative thing, that you're doing virtue signaling by wearing a shirt that says love thy neighbor, or by putting out a sign that says all are welcome here. And I don't know if everybody agrees with me. Those things are important. They're not all the work, but they are one step. This ties back to what we've been saying about living in a place where it feels like, and the elections tell us, the majority support white nationalism and white Christian nationalism and these other things. Just having those signs out for people in the community to know that there are neighbors who love them and support them. To me, I think that matters. Again, it is not everything. It may not be the most important thing, but it is something, and it's a step on a path. So I hope people sometimes don't get encouraged about thinking, discouraged by thinking, well, I can't fix this, I shouldn't do this. Like, do what you can. I think Marnie Taylor at the Center for Nonprofits, I think it comes from St. Francis, don't quote me on that, do the most that you can in the way that you can every time you can. Even little things matter. Hopefully little things build into bigger things, but find somewhere to start.
So the analogy that always comes to my mind is, live your life so that when the flag goes up in your yard, all your neighbors say, oh yeah, obviously.
I'll ask one more question and then we'll open it up to questions from the audience. And Sheri, I want to thank you. You've expanded my vocabulary by one word, non-melanated. My last question is, so how do you have hope that things will get better?
Ooh. So some days I don't. In the 23rd year of all the lords and gods, we're still experiencing first in Black and brown skin, even in non-melanated skin, with people with wombs, with people who dare love who they love. We're still making strides of things that have not been done yet. And that can be daunting. And so while one of my mentors who just recently retired, Uncle Jesse, and we have our own Pastor Jesse Jackson here in Oklahoma, certainly is my co-conspirator, also my boss. So I want to shout out to the Oklahoma JJ. But my Uncle Jesse Jackson of the Rainbow Coalition, who just recently retired, and I said, he said, people are saying about time. And he was looking at me and said, well, what do you have to say? And I was like, I'm just trying to figure out what are you going to do? Because I know that he's not necessarily like, you don't get to retire from this work when there is still so much work to do. And I said to Veronica, the work never stops. And so one of the most famous slogans that Reverend Jackson said was, keep hope alive. And I said, well, I think about that, but hope means hope that we're, keep Sheri alive, keep Veronica alive, keep Adam alive. And so you have to have a essence of aliveness, of living with intention and deliberate action to even be able to continue the idea of hope. And the idea of hope is very different than the action of walking in hope. In very dismal times and dismal moments, everybody was, I also work within the Democratic Party. And they were like, well, you got to remember such and such this, no church and state. And I'm like, are you serious? Like, that has never been the case where church and state have not run concurrently, right? And those that say they don't believe that it should be, like they say our founding fathers, and I was like, do you really know who they were? Because they probably, one of them factor into my lineage somehow. And someone said, oh, so you have, is that why you're light skinned? Does that give you hope? And I said, well, my grandmother, who was fairer skinned than I, she was like, sweetheart, we're just rape colored. And that was astonishing. And when she looked at me and she says, I need you to understand, accept truths, even when they're hard. And so she said, in the same way that you expect hope and hope for change, you have to deal with the truth to be able to get to those spaces. So what hope looks like for me is toward the end of the day, so when I leave here, I'll be going to serve as a chaplain in one of our carceral facilities. Is I hope that my words and my actions is going to offer a different level of humanity to a group of people that we as Christians, people of faith-based systems, people of different belief systems, even if it's agnostic or atheism, we forget about those that have been pushed into spaces that we're not supposed to see. We have forgotten that it is a lie of the system around rehabilitation, which it's really about recidivism. We forget that they are simply humans who deserve a level of dignity and compassion, and that's what brings change. So hope for me is hoping that I get it righter, as my nephew says, Auntie, I'm trying to get it righter today. And I'm always like, Josiah, that's amazing. But at 5, he knows that he can get it righter, and he has hope that he will, and he's successful in that. And so hope for me means that I get it righter, that someone at the end of the day is feeling just maybe a little bit encouraged. And sometimes I hope that that's me. And sometimes hope for me just means I hope that my foster children are not destroying my house while I'm sitting here being in community. Sometimes that's what hope means, because some of you all know over the last since they've been in my home, I've had a fire. My ceiling has fallen in. The doors have come off of the hinges. The HVAC system is out. And so sometimes I also hope that someone says, as Veronica said, that you want to take care of those that are in the streets, that are on the front lines, that are doing the work, that someone decides that offering hope comes in a form of a donation or a check, because the movement has never been free, and the revolution always comes at a cost that we don't think about. So I hope that we think about those things. And I hope that some of the things that I say resonate. And I hope that those that are uncomfortable stay courageous enough to stay in that discomfort to where you make changes. And my last hope is, and yes, this is a shout out, but it's somebody that I care about. I hope before I leave here today, I get to hug my friend with the last name of Cornblit, who was the first person and first organization that had hope around Black Lives Matter. And they showed that with love and financial support, and they kept us afloat. So I hope that I get to hug my friend.
So I will say that I don't necessarily consider myself a hopeful or optimistic person necessarily. I'm kind of skeptical and a little cynical. But when I do, but when I look at the longer course, my lifetime, American history, and I think I mentioned this earlier, we see progress. Not always, right? We see a presidential election in 2008 that gives hope and is change and is positive. And then 2016, in my opinion, not so positive. But we have these signs. We see people, we see more freedom. 10 years ago, probably many people in this room, possibly including me, didn't really know what a trans person was or a non-binary person was. And now we know them, we recognize them, we love them. I hope we're fighting for them. That's a sign of progress. So that is the thing that gives me hope, is that we see these signs, that we know we can do the work in our communities, in ourselves, sitting when something is uncomfortable, learning. That's where it comes from, is because not because I just think, hey, it's going to work out, but because I see the evidence of it. That's what gives me hope.
Make it brighter.
Yes.
I love that.
I wish I'd had that yesterday. I wish I'd had you yesterday. Yesterday, I was very privileged to spend some time with the Summer Policy Institute, which is a program put together by the Oklahoma Policy Institute for students, college and above, to come and learn about all kinds of aspects of policy and advocacy in Oklahoma. And we were talking about immigration, which meant we are also talking about white supremacy, about American imperialism, about a capitalist machine that crushes people for their labor and extracts all it can financially out of them and then tosses them aside when it's done with them. We talked about the hope and the lie of the American dream. We were talking about a lot of stuff. And at the end of that session, I got the exact same question. What gives you hope? We had talked about so many of the struggles that immigrants face here in Oklahoma, in our city, in our communities, some of which are structural, some of which are emotional, mental, psychological, some of which can be alleviated, and some of which cannot, right? And they said, what gives you hope? And I said, well, tomorrow, I, a Korean American atheist who works for a Muslim civil rights organization, I'm going to a Christian church to talk about white nationalism. If that's not hopeful, I don't know what is. And a further piece of hope is that none of you have gotten up and left. So we're doing something right. And I also think that hope is two things, right? I can sit on my couch all day and hope that someone will do the dishes. I can hope that the windows get cleaned. I can hope that the house will get picked up. And that is definitely hope. That is aspirational, right? That is the dream. But am I the hoper who stays on the couch? Or am I the hoper who says, I better get up and do the dishes? America, it's time to get up and do the dishes. We can hope all day, but if hope is not tied to action, it is just thoughts. When we tie our anger at the way things are to our courage to ensure that they don't remain the way that they are, then we have action. We have hope, the verb, and not hope, the noun. So what brings me hope is that you came here today. That is an action. You are listening. That is action. What other actions are on your to-do list today? That's a question for y'all.
I just want to summarize one thing from that. First of all, I do want to highlight, like, make it righter. That's just perfect. There's a line from a rap song from, I think, the 90s from Arrested Development that says the words hope and the word change are opposite, not the same. And so that's kind of that point, is like, yes, you can hope for things, but you have to work.
Okay, now I'm going to go around and get questions from the audience. Please keep your questions short and either address them to the entire panel or to one person on the panel. And I'll ask the panelists to just speak from either one of the hard mics. Any questions? Joan, I'll give you a chance. You wanna say
Oh.
something?
Thank you. Well, mostly I came to hear what we can do, and each of you have addressed that. And I personally appreciate all of you, and I only wish my husband was here. He wanted to be here. So thank you for all that each of you do for our community.
Thank you all for your wonderful discussion so far. My name is Bradley Havener. I'm the founder and former tri-chair of the Oklahoma Poor People's Campaign. That's our state's chapter of the national movement led by Reverend Barber and Reverend Liz Theo Harris. But I'm asking from a movement standpoint that I'm out here, I'm here. Thank you for your answers on hope, but it's not enough for me. I'm not asking you to give me the next steps, but to walk with me in the next steps and just give me a chance to give us a chance. Those of us that are willing, please let us do the work. Don't carry it all yourselves. We are here with you. There are other folks out here trying to do that work, but thank you. And I know that was a question. Maybe if you all want to see how things you can do, you can go to poorpeoplescampaign.org and join our movement.
Lisa, do you want to ask a question? Okay, all right. Yeah.
Oh, this is a comment, white Christian think we're the chosen people in America. But a few years back, I went to a seminar where they were discussing early American history. And back then, somebody said, if there was a just God, I fear for this country. I was just wondering if anybody want to comment on that in any way.
I'll address that a little sort of out of a sense of responsibility to owe you an answer. I wouldn't presume to know what God wants or how God will judge us. I think we see in scripture, all kinds of scripture, we see ideals and precepts that we can work toward. But again, I think that work is on us as communities, as individuals, to decide what do we want and what can we and what are we willing to do to get there. So this idea, you mentioned the chosen people, and that comes up a lot in Judaism. And it is something that I'm sometimes not comfortable with. Again, personally, I urge you to speak to a rabbi about it, because that is separating, right? That is saying, hey, we are different, we are better. And actually kind of, so I'm uncomfortable with that sometimes. I don't know that that's the case. I think we are all equal, which I hope is still an American ideal. And that kind of gets into this idea of American exceptionalism. This is tying back to some things from our earlier presentation, that I do believe America is great and has a lot of value and can be a beacon of hope at our best. But when people believe because we are America, we are therefore always better and always exceptional, that I think can open the door to white Christian nationalism and saying, hey, we're doing it, therefore it is America, therefore it is better, right? And we need to think deeper about it and say, okay, but is it really living up to our ideals? Is that really something that we would want the rest of the world to mimic? Is this being our best selves? So I guess anytime you start talking about exceptionalism, I want to know, like, why? Are you really doing the work, or are you just saying that it's a tautology? It is because it is. So I've kind of gone a far afield there. I told you in my intro that if I started talking about these things, who knows where they're going to go. But I do think it's not necessarily helpful to say we are better, they are judged, we are judged. It's just to do the work to be as good as we can be.
Okay. Anyone else?
I want to read to you a headline from the Enid paper, page 3 this morning. I just lost it. 5 white nationalist members sentenced for riot conspiracy. This comes from Idaho, and it was from the hate group Patriot Front that had conspired together to riot at a pride event. Now, this is what disturbs me in this news. Maybe it disturbs you too. Judge James Stowe sentenced each of the men on Friday to 5 days in jail, with credit for 2 days already served. And the reported fine was $1,000 each. How do we make a difference in how justice works?
Adam Luck likes to say, who was the chairman of the Pardon and Parole Board, and then resigned under pressure from Governor Stitt, that our criminal justice system is not broken. It's working exactly the way it's designed to work. It's controlled by district attorneys, and a lot of district attorneys go on to be judges. I try to have good relationships with district attorneys. but I still see them as a problem.
I'll get double teamed now.
Yeah, and I'm gonna go first because I have so much respect for Veronica, and I know that she's gonna come from a very different perspective, and she's a whole attorney, and so from the legal sense. But I just wanted to advise you now that from that paper and that information, somewhat there's some of us in this room that are not the least bit surprised that the fine was $1,000, that they did 5 days in jail. But earlier when I said if you are shocked and concerned when things like that happen to non-melanated people, but you're not as concerned to just 2 days ago, the headline was that 6 Black people in Oklahoma City attending a block party where someone called in a noise complaint was arrested and charged with felony rioting. And just in 2020, those of us that were protesting, we were charged with terrorism. And the lowest bond of the 6, and yes, this is another plea because we're trying to raise funds to be able to get them out. And for those 6 people, we only need about $2.7 million. Why? Because the lowest bond is $400,000 for a person who was privy to the riot. The person that they said was leading the riot at the community block party, and they just told the police that we don't need to be over policed and to leave us alone and don't kill us today, like stop killing us. That person's bond is $750,000. So small disparity in how bonds and sentencing or charges are actually given. And I wonder what we're supposed to hope for, how that's going to turn out, because I think they probably are looking at a little bit more than 5 days in jail with 2 given, 2 relieved as like 2 served. So there's a difference. So maybe that's a little shocking.
Do you know we have Patriot Front operating in Oklahoma? Like, I run the Legal Observer program. So when folks like Sheri are in the streets fighting for justice, the legal observers operate to ensure that law enforcement are not abusing those who are exercising their First Amendment rights. And we document those abuses if they occur so that people who have been subject to violence at the hands of the state can use that information in a future legal proceeding. And I was legal observing for a protest, and armed militia were out following us around. I mean, like strapped like they're about to invade a small country. And the police were out.
Or participate in an insurrection.
That part right there. And the police were out to monitor this small group of college students who were marching around the county jail, followed by an equal number of heavily armed militia who were talking to each other through shoulder mics, each armed with a long gun and at least 2 visible pistols and body armor. And who are the cops focusing on? Our small band of college students marching around the jail with signs and a loudspeaker, pulling a cooler of bottled water because it was hot, because it was the summertime. And if that is shocking to anybody, and you haven't seen how the Oklahoma City Police Department operates with regards to those who are exercising their First Amendment rights. So these folks are operating here in our communities. Those guys in Enid who are in Idaho, people knew them. They had families. People knew that they were going to do this, and it is only by grace that they were stopped before they carried out what they had planned to carry out. If you know these people in your community, you have an obligation to take the platform away from them. We have to deplatform people like the Patriot Front. We have to make it so that there are consequences for what they do. And if the law is not going to assess consequences, then we can make sure they don't get jobs. We can make sure they're not welcome in our community centers, at our social gatherings. We can make sure that people know this man wanted to blow up a pride parade. Do you want him around your children? Right? We can make it so that there are consequences when and where the law will not exact consequences. And don't get me wrong, I am not advocating for extrajudicial violence. We have all seen where that leads. But not every consequence has to be violent. Not every consequence is state sanctioned. But consequences should exist for people who want to cause harm to other people, right? I think reimagining a carceral system, right? Acknowledging that our criminal justice, criminal legal system is fundamentally unjust means reimagining what consequences look like for bad behavior. Clearly, locking people up in jail for the remainder of their lives is not fixing the problem, right? We look at somebody and we say, hey, you transgressed a law violently. Let me throw you into a violently transgressive system for 10, 15, 20, 40 years. And then you're going to come out the other side and suddenly you're not going to want to do that anymore. Has that worked? Has that worked for anybody? No, it has not. So what are we as a community going to do, acknowledging that a stay in prison is not going to stop these people? They can't get jobs now. They're not going to get married because no one is going to want to sit with that person, right? There are consequences for their behavior, right? If you cannot change their mind, then you stop giving them a platform to spread that hate. I hope that answers somewhat of the question.
And I also want to say that systems that we're talking about is also one of the largest systems used for voter suppression. Because once you are convicted and you are a felon, it is years and years sometimes that you're not able to vote. And so if you're able to incarcerate, like Oklahoma does, the number one amount of Black women or Black people and Indigenous people and poor people, then you're able to literally divide and deduce the amount of collective power we can have in one of the arenas that we need to have collective power in electoral politics. And then we understand why many people feel like their vote doesn't matter, because they have been stripped of the ability to do so. And I also want to say, when we talk about violence, I want you to know, and it has been said by many people, that the absence of violence never indicates that there is peace. And nonviolent activism, that is strategy. And it was strategy used mostly by Black people to remain alive. So we had to choose to be physically harmed, to be incarcerated. Some lost their lives, many, with nonviolent strategy, simply so that even if it is me that is taken away, my family is safer, because most people in Black and brown skin don't actually know and don't feel like we'll ever know what it is to be safe. And this may be shocking. We may have people from the Patriot Front, from the Proud Boys, from the active chapters of the KKK that are in Oklahoma. There is a moderate cell growing here in Edmond. We have a large cell in Idabel and many other places, but they come to events like this to gather information, to know what their targets are talking about. And those like Veronica, myself, and Adam, who have chosen to make ourselves targets in a very different way. It happens. And so realize that the person that you're sitting next to or the person sitting behind you could very well be someone who came here with ill will and deliberate intention to cause harm.
I'll
Would
ask-
that person stand up? Just thought I would try. You stood up, Adam. Sit down. I told you.
I paused. I do want to say one kind of larger thing about the justice system, because again, it ties into these issues. And when Sheri was talking about how incarceration is a form of voter suppression, because I've heard these conversations where people will say, well, yes, but the system's not intended to do that. It does not overtly say we're going to jail Black people so that they don't vote. Fine. But what we have to look at when we're talking about systems is, what is the effect of the laws? We pass these laws, we put people in power. What is the effect? Whether or not it was intended to be racist, if the effect is racist, then we need to address that in some way.
Tell them that that's why jails and prisons were created, to re-enslave Black people.
I don't know enough of the history of that, but that does seem right. The point is that jails and prisons were a form of re-enslavement. There is a lot to that, and also I think this idea, again, starting 30 years ago, of really harsh sentences. Veronica touched on this, that if you say to somebody, you've committed a crime, now you're going to spend the next 15 years, for example, away from society, doing nothing productive, being given no skills, then we can't be surprised when people aren't rehabilitated by that. This isn't even really the issue that I'm most passionate about. Again, this is one of these things where just, to me, looking at it objectively, you see that it's not working. It's not doing what it is said to be done. I'm not necessarily an abolitionist on prison and the carceral system, but I do think reimagining is important. Well, there you go. 2 out of 3.
I have a question after I give this comment, but our daughter has been married for 10 years to a Black man, and we have Black grandchildren. And he had a really frightening encounter with a policeman who stopped him and said his name was associated with a child molester, which we Googled it. That was totally bogus. Then he said his car was a suspect in a robbery. And then he said he was acting too nervous. Duh. Then he gave him a ticket for his taillights being out, which they weren't. They even took it to the shop. These taillights were coming. Now, this is something that's happened many times, which I'm sure doesn't shock you, obviously. Like, he was stopped once in his Air Force uniform, and the policeman said, I didn't know they let you boys fly planes. And another time actually, this is twice, they've been stopped together, and the police officers questioned her to say, are you all right? Are you safe? Like, I don't know. Anyway, my question is, are the policemen being infiltrated by these white nationalists? And if so, what can we do about this?
I don't know if the police are being infiltrated. I know that that's why they were created. It was the white nationalists, the KKK, and all of the other hate groups that started the system of policing. And so make no mistake that those systems, as we've said before, are working exactly as they were intended and designed to do. People in Black skin, especially those that are seen as masculine or male presenting, are pulled over all the time, every day. I have Black son. One of the reasons why I'm most passionate, and the day that was when he was born, and that's over a couple of decades ago, It was terrible then. And he says I overmother because I call him 2 or 3 times a day and we don't live far apart. And I know that it generally even if he hits all 3 red lights and the stop sign, that it should take 7 minutes and 43 seconds for him to get to my house. That's if he hits every red light. When it goes to 9 minutes, I suffer terror every time. And he now picks up the phone and calls and says, I stopped to get gas. I stopped to, Mom, there was somebody who was selling the Curbside Chronicle. And you told me whenever I see a person, if I have $5, give them half. And so I was trying to come up with money to be able to give them, or I went to go get them something to drink and to eat. My son doing things that just means that he's a good human causes terror because it goes beyond the 7 minutes and 43 seconds that it should take him to get there. I served in the military and I know what it is to serve a country and to love a country that has never loved us back. That constantly reminds us that we are still second-class citizens and that there is not a level of freedom, and people are not concerned about us being liberated in any form or faction. And they send us messages. It was on the news. They've blown up 2 of my homes, but they put Molotov cocktails in my parents' homes. They killed, and I had a friend of mine who's white who said, make sure that you tell this part because that's what's going to translate and evoke outrage. They said, tell them that the white supremacists killed your dog. And they put the dog on the curb and wrote a message in my pet's blood. And I sat there and had to take that in. And they said, the fact that they killed your animal or your pet is going to actually solicit and incite a more passionate and compassionate response. And they'll take action quicker if your animal was harmed than it was if there are more and more Black bodies that are still laying in the street. And that has been proven to be true. So we got the gasp and the looks of disdain when you talked about what happened, and the police, literally referring to you boys. That's a level of civility we don't generally get because they usually just call us niggers. And so when we have to deal with that type of language on a daily basis, because I still get the calls, I still get the threats, we're still trying to figure out how to survive. And now your daughter is in danger because she loves someone in melanated skin and you have Black grandchildren, and this in your family. And many of us that live this terror every day, we don't have a solution because our humanity never should have been up for debate. And it still is. And people are still asking us how to help us survive. Many people have said, well, we're here, so you're speaking to the choir. Well, I may be, but now I'm asking the choir to sing. I need you all to sing and sing out to protect everyone and think a little bit less about protecting yourselves, because the privilege of your whiteness is something that many of you all still don't understand, embrace, and realize that simply being born in that skin gives you a level of protection that we will never know. And it allows you to be comfortable in moments, and it even allows you a different level of discomfort. To be able to experience discomfort and process it and make the decision of what you're going to do, that's a privilege that sometimes it just is daunting and it's heavy, and it's space that we don't have to hold anymore. So stop being shocked that racism and white supremacy is so prevalent in a state and on land that we sing about a song that this land is your land and my land, and it's not. How can you be so inhumane on stolen land? When we mock our indigenous people by putting a statue of an indigenous person on top of a state capitol that was literally, that sits in the middle of Northeast OKC, where they also stole the culture and the property, and they're still doing it. They just call it gentrification now, and eminent domain. So much more is happening than us just getting called boys and gals, and Missy and all of those things. But we are sick of your micro and your macro aggressions. Veronica already said, don't ask us something that you can Google, but make sure that you are Googling, and that when you get the information, you are using it for a better purpose. Because that means, as Josiah said, that you are getting it righter.
No, thank you.
You gave
Thank you. That will be our last word. First, I would ask, please show your appreciation for our panelists. One thing that's become clear to me this weekend is that this is only the beginning of the discussion. I don't know. I don't know where it goes from here, but we obviously need to continue this discussion with chapter 2. So we'll figure out a way to do that in this forum. Some people were complaining about giving contact information. One of the things, the only use I can think for it right now is to use those email addresses and let you know if we have something else along these lines at this congregation. This is the second time Sheri has been spoken here. The first time was a community grief session for Isaiah Lewis that CC Jones Davis put together. Isaiah was a 17-year-old student, senior at Edmond Memorial, and he was shot and killed by the police. He was naked. So, you know, I don't know where we go from here, honestly. I will say, Michelle Alexander wrote the New Jim Crow, and she tries to conclude the book on a word of hope, but it's more a word of realism. And she says that just making reforms to the criminal justice system isn't going to change anything. We've had this problem for 400 years, and it has always just morphed into something else as we have had, you know, temporary advances. It will express itself in another way. So we have to do more than just, you know, try to limit the power of the district attorneys or abolish the death penalty, end mass incarceration. It's gonna express itself in some other way. It evolves. It's an organic system that we haven't figured out a way how to deal with it. So that's our charge, is to make some progress in changing that system, so that our children don't experience these things. Thank you. Thank you.